Hey everyone, I'm your host Cadence, and welcome back to another episode of Project Honesty, a podcast designed for young adults, by a young adult, to gain brutally honest, friend-like advice, as well as provide a platform for young adults to form opinions, color outside of the lines, take deep dives into current events, and most importantly, have fun. This is Project Honesty, navigating reality with real conversations and diverse opinions. If you haven't already, go check out last week's episode called Borderline Honesty, the female Canadian take on US politics. Wrapping up this 3-part US politics series, I wanted to share my honest thoughts and opinions on the US political system as a young Canadian female. I talk about the candidate I would vote for if I was American and why, the major problems I see in American politics, and my predictions for the upcoming November 5th federal election. Take a listen now to hear more. That is available on Spotify and YouTube. And today's topic, if you haven't already seen it, again, like I always say, Project_Honesty24 on Instagram. That is where we release every single weekly topic. Today's topic is about domestic violence and abuse. This episode is inspired by the It Ends With Us movie released on August 9th of 2024, as well as the fact that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I am going to discuss what happens behind closed doors and statistics around domestic violence in Canada, how DV affects the mental health of women, and I'm also going to talk about the It Ends With Us movie and the societal insensitivity surrounding the topic of domestic violence. I want to start off by saying that domestic violence does not only affect women. People of all genders and gender identities can and are affected by DV. Just because I'm choosing to focus on domestic violence against women does not mean it doesn't happen to others. I also want to provide a trigger warning because, of course, when discussing domestic violence, it's important to give a trigger warning as this is an upsetting or disturbing topic for some. I'll be discussing the types of abuse that occurs with domestic violence, and I know that can be triggering and disturbing for some. Also, if you or anyone that you know is a victim or currently struggling with domestic violence, I'm going to leave some resources in the description below. I want to start off by talking about what domestic violence is. Now, the issue of DV is very complex because DV is something not easily seen. Again, it is a violence that takes place behind closed doors. It's a pattern or repetition of abusive behavior that takes place in private, and the purpose is to gain or maintain power with an intimate partner relationship, or in other words, gaining control over a partner. There are many different types of domestic violence. The most commonly heard of and talked about form is physical and sexual abuse. So hitting, shoving, grabbing, biting, hair pulling, and forced alcohol and drug use are just some of the forms of physical abuse. Coercing sexual contact or behavior without consent, marital rape, forced sexual intercourse following physical abuse, or being sexually demeaning are examples of what sexual abuse is. Some other types of domestic violence that I find aren't most commonly talked about. We have emotional abuse, so damaging one's self-worth and self-esteem as a form of abuse. Repetitive and constant criticism, name-calling, or destroying one's relationships with their children are just some of the forms of emotional abuse, but again, this can take place in any form. That's the thing with domestic violence, is that there's so many different things that fall under the umbrella term of domestic violence. And so even me going through this list right now still is leaving out some of the factors that are under domestic violence. There's also economic abuse, so restricting or controlling someone's access to economic resources that they're entitled to, often through coercion, fraud, or manipulation. So this includes limiting access to money, assets, credit, or financial information, unfairly using their personal resources, or unduly influencing their financial decisions. It can also involve forcing defaults on financial obligations, exploiting legal authorities like power of attorney, or neglecting fiduciary responsibilities. So that is some of the examples of economic abuse. There's also psychological abuse. Now, I actually didn't know that there was a difference between emotional and psychological, but I guess when it comes down to it, there is. So psychological is causing fear from intimidation, threatening physical harm to self or others, destruction of property and belongings, including pets, and forced isolation from friends, family, school, and/or work. that is some of the things that fall under psychological abuse. And this kind of abuse is closely related to emotional abuse. And I think that's where people, including me, kind of get them mixed up. But they are two different things. There's also technological abuse. So a behavior or series of actions meant to harm, threaten, control, stalk, harass, impersonate, exploit, extort, or monitor another person through any form of technology. So this includes, but isn't limited to, internet-enabled devices, so like cameras, online platforms, computers, mobile devices, again, cameras, imaging software, apps, location tracking tools, so like Life 360 or like Apple Maps, communication technology, or any other form of technology. All of this can be a form of technological abuse. Domestic violence can happen to anyone. So regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc., it can happen. DV does not only affect the person that it's inflicted on, but it can also affect family, friends, coworkers, and other witnesses. DV especially can affect children who are witnesses to this abuse growing up. When looking at Canadian statistics around DV, in any situation, especially domestic violence statistics, it is hard to get accurate data about how many women experience DV. This is because there is a lot of shame and stigma and fear around properly reporting domestic violence. A lot of women experiencing domestic violence, or women who have experienced domestic violence, are manipulated or scared into not reporting the abuse they face because there was threats made to their family or friends or careers, and so they want to protect their family, friends, and careers, so a lot of abuse goes unreported. It is also not properly reported because of the lack of trust in the justice system, an understandable reason considering the fact that the government doesn't necessarily make it easy for DV victims to properly prosecute their abusers. And I can't remember the name of it. There's been a couple movies showing that even though women have gone through abuse and taken it to court, it doesn't always go in the victim's favor, which in long term causes more pain than before. But some of the other reasons is expenses, long waits for court, or a fear of not being heard or advocated for in the courtroom, which is one of the biggest motivating factors to women not reporting their DV properly, is because of this injustice in the courtroom. The most recent police data from 2019 in Canada shows that out of 810,000 people who experienced domestic violence in Canada, 79% of those people were women. There's also self-reported / social data available from 2018, so independent companies doing their own independent surveys and research around domestic violence. So that's what a self-report means. Shows that 44% of women who had ever been in an intimate relationship before in their life, starting from the age of 15, reported having experienced some form of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse in an intimate relationship in their lifetime. In comparison to men, women are more likely to experience more extreme forms of domestic violence. So this includes being forced to perform non-consensual sexual acts, being locked or confined in a room, forced sexual intercourse, choking, or having harm directed towards pets. Out of all people that have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime starting from the age of 15, women are 4 times more likely to have feared their partner. 55% of women who have experienced DV in their lifetime have said that they have feared a partner at some point. Fearing a partner is a strong indicator of domestic violence and abuse. 3 in 10 women aged 15 to 24 reported having experienced 1 or more incidents of DV within 12 months of the survey. That is higher than any other age category that was surveyed. This connects to the fact that young women, so particularly people that are 15 to 24, are at higher risk, with them being 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted, 3 times more likely to be physically assaulted, as well as almost 3 times more likely to be emotionally, financially, or psychologically abused. When it comes to Indigenous women, 61% of Indigenous women in Canada have experienced some form of DV throughout their life, starting at 15. 1 in 6 Indigenous women experienced some form of domestic violence within 12 months before the survey. When it comes to women in the LGBTQ plus community, 67% of these women who have ever been in an intimate relationship have experienced some form of domestic violence since the age of 15. Almost half of these same women say that they have been physically or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner since 15, almost double the same statistics taken on straight women. 1 in 5 LGBTQ plus women said that they had experienced DV within the last year. Again, that's almost double the same statistic taken on straight women. Women with disabilities are at a particularly difficult disadvantage. 55% of women with a disability who had ever been in an intimate relationship reported having had experienced some form of domestic violence. In the 12 months before the survey, 16% of women with disabilities had experienced some form of domestic violence. And then the correlation in statistics for women who are both LGBTQ plus and disabled, 71% of them had experienced some form of domestic violence since the age of 15. It is not only domestic violence causing physical pain, but there is also intimate partner homicide. So between 2014 and 2019, there were 497 victims of intimate partner homicide. 80% of those victims were women. Even though Indigenous women account for a mere 5% of all women in Canada, they accounted for 21% of all female victims of intimate partner homicide. In 2020, 53 women in Canada were killed by their partner, 11 of which were Indigenous women. That was a lot of numbers, and that was the heaviest that this episode will go. But those statistics really are hard to believe as is, but we also have to take into account that there are more. Without a doubt, there are more victims that are going unreported that we don't know about and that we will never ever hear from. And so it's a lot. I want to talk about what DV can do to a person's mental health. When someone experiences DV, their risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder is increased. They're also at risk for rapidly declining or fragile mental health, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, so drug and alcohol use, dissociative identity disorder, and they're at higher risk for suicide or suicidal ideation. In a lot of cases, due to the abuse and the manipulation from their former partner, the victim will blame themselves for the abuse they endured. This can feed into all the mental health issues, so the PTSD, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, when the victim begins to blame themselves. And this can develop into anger issues and will affect their future intimate relationships. Same goes for survivors of sexual abuse. Future sexual or intimate moments might become a trigger for them due to the abuse that they endured. And this is where I want to start talking about the It Ends With Us movie. A movie based on the book by Colleen Hoover, It Ends With Us, was a book written by Hoover, inspired by her mother and father's abusive relationship. Described as being one of the hardest books she has ever written, Colleen does an amazing job bringing awareness to the all-common reality for a lot of women of domestic violence and emotional abuse. I cried when I went and watched the movie. I also cried when I watched the book. And I think they both did a really good job of showcasing how hidden domestic violence can be, and then also the effects that it has on those around the victims. And there was no problem with the movie, actually, or its message. In fact, a lot of survivors commented on the movie saying it told their story and brought awareness to this reality for a lot of women. Justin Baldoni, the director, but also one of the main characters, was so heavily involved in respecting the sensitive topic of domestic violence, and he brought so much light and awareness to the male's involvement in domestic abuse. And his character, little spoiler throughout the movie, he was the one doing the abuse. He was committing the abuse. And through interviews, you can tell that this was very hard for him to kind of fathom. He felt very out of body during that character because it's not him, as he said during interviews. And through these interviews, you can tell he just gets so emotional, and he truly focuses on the message of the movie more than anything else. And he's shared resources on his Instagram and other social media platforms. And Baldoni did a really good job of listening to people about domestic violence, because I think in his position as a man, he felt, I wouldn't want to say out of place, but he's very empathetic to victims of domestic violence. Now let's talk insensitivity. Let's talk Blake Lively. Watching press interviews after the movie was released, I was heavily disappointed in Blake Lively's response to questions about what people can do to help victims of domestic violence. She said, quote, "Grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it," completely forgetting to mention the fact that this is a movie that was made to bring awareness to domestic violence, which was quite tone deaf considering the heaviness of the movie. She also made another insensitive and rude comment in response to how she would help domestic violence victims, and she said, quote, "I can just bring them home with me? Is that what you want? They can all just come home with me." That is another tone-deaf comment made about a movie that discusses domestic violence and shares the reality of what DV is like for many women. And with her being a woman, you would think that she would approach this topic with a little more heart and a little more empathy. And I felt that I was just very disappointed in her reaction to that movie, especially considering that so many women face domestic violence, and I was hoping that she'd be a little bit more sensitive to it. I recommend watching this movie. It's just such a powerful message, and it brings such great awareness to the issue of domestic violence. So go watch that. I don't know where you can watch it, but go figure it out. And again, to leave this episode off, I just want to say that if you or anyone you know is a victim of domestic violence, I have left resources in the description below to hopefully provide some help. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of Project Honesty. You can find Project Honesty on Spotify at Project Honesty or on YouTube at Project_Honesty. And to keep up to date with new episodes, you can head over to Project Honesty's Instagram, which is at Project_Honesty24. We also have a TikTok, which is Project.Honesty. We also have a website. The link for the website is in our Instagram bio. And to help spread this podcast everywhere, tell a friend or share with family about Project Honesty, and you can direct them over to the Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, or website to help them learn more. Subscribe, follow, and click the bell icon for updates when I post. And remember, the more listeners, the bigger the family.